You might think running, jumping, and throwing are pretty straightforward, but apparently it's a little more complicated than that. From insane gender testing to juiced up super sprinters, these are the most controversial moments in track and field history. At the very beginning of Olympic track and field lore. No, not ancient Greece. We're talking about the inaugural modern-day Olympics in 1896, held in Athens. It looks like the Olympics didn't wait long to be controversial. Can you guess what animal helped a Greek marathon runner cheat during his event? We're not horsing around either. When Spirit and Bellicos came running back into the stadium to finish his marathon, he looked a little too rested. And not too long after the race had finished, it was obvious to everyone that Bellicos decided he had enough of the charade and admitted to the error of his ways. It turns out that after mile 10, Bellicos decided to take a leisurely ride in a horse-drawn carriage for the remainder of the race. Hilariously and karmically, Bellicos only managed to finish third, even with the extra horsepower, making him the first in a long line of bad track and field cheaters. Speaking of cheaters, Stella Walsh really puts the in gender controversy. Do you know what year marked the first time women could participate in track and field at the Olympics? It was 1928, and that was scandalous in itself. Newspapers, politicians, and even women protested against females joining the competition. Crazy. However, a controversy between defending champion Stella Walsh of Poland and Helen Stevens of America reached new levels of insanity after Stevens defeated Walsh. Walsh's supporters weren't exactly good sports about it either. They cried foul play, saying that no woman could run as fast as Stevens did. They went straight to the Olympic Committee and demanded that a gender examination be done on Stevens to prove she was a woman. Stevens accepted the challenge and allowed officials to perform the humiliating examination. It turns out, not surprisingly, that Stevens did in fact have female genitalia. As if this story couldn't get any crazier. Decades later, sore loser Stella Walsh was unfortunately murdered outside a Cleveland shopping mall. Yikes. When an autopsy was performed on Walsh, it turns out Walsh had male genitalia all along. So the woman who had been trying to disqualify her opponent for being a man turned out, you got it, to be a man. It was a real-life Austin Powers moment. Wow, Austin Powers knows a lot about the 60s. He was the grooviest cat of the times. Two other groovy and brave athletes dominated the newspapers of the day as well, Tommy Smith and John Carlos. These two proudly held the Black Power salute high as they received their medals. But besides the controversial salute they made, do you know what else the two sprinting medalists wore or didn't wear to amplify their protest? 1968 was a tumultuous year for American politics. The Vietnam War was ramping up, Bobby Kennedy and Dr. King were both assassinated, African Americans were fighting for basic civil rights, and when Smith and Carlos, African Americans themselves, took the medal stand to receive their gold and bronze medals, they decided to use the worldwide stage of the Olympics to make a statement in favor of equal civil rights. They both held their fists up high as the American national anthem played. They also wore long black socks with no shoes to represent black poverty. The gesture was met with extreme hate, and the two brave athletes were largely ostracized from the U.S. sporting community. The International Olympic Committee deemed the action unfit for the apolitical international forum of the Olympic Games and expelled the two from the U.S. Olympic team. Did you know that it is not illegal to go barefoot during a race? South African middle-distance runner Zola Budd took full advantage, or disadvantage of this rule if you really think about it. In the 1984 Summer Olympics, American Mary Decker was the heavy favorite to win the gold. Everyone was rooting for Decker. She had missed the 1980 Moscow Olympics due to the American protest of the Games. She had missed the 1976 Montreal Games due to an injury. Decker was a storyline for the millions of viewers watching at home. A real Wonder Woman. But during her final in the 3,000-meter event, here came barefoot Budd out in front of Decker. A determined Decker went to make a pass, and down goes Decker. The South Africans seemed to have denied the passing of Decker by tripping her, or at least that is how Decker saw it. Millions of Americans agreed with Decker, but the IOC ultimately decided not to penalize Budd, saying that it was on Decker to pass responsibly. At the end of the race, Budd's trip didn't do her much favor as she finished fourth. Decker did not recover from the trip and exited the race. She never got that Olympic gold medal. Our next controversy took place 4 years after Decker's infamous trip. It was the 1988 Olympics in Seoul, Korea. Did you know that the 100 100-meter final at Seoul is often called the dirtiest race in track and field history, it was the meeting of rival sprinting giants, the Canadian Ben Johnson and the American Carl Lewis. The pair drew the attention of millions around the world. The two had met a total of 17 times. Lewis blew past Johnson during the first 8 times they matched, but Johnson had won the last 8 of 9 matches prior to Seoul. Over the course of their 17 matches, the two are known to have spoken to each other one time, briefly. The whole world was watching. As the starting gun fired, Johnson exploded out of the blocks and never looked back. He beat his own world record by running a blazing 9.79 seconds. Lewis even ran over to congratulate Johnson as the race ended, but the celebration would be short-lived. 3 days later, IOC officials would announce to the world that Ben Johnson tested positive for banned substances. Johnson would be stripped of his medal and lambasted by the worldwide media.
At the time, I didn't have any second opinion. I was a young boy. And that's it. Then, I win the gold medal and I lost it.
However, not too much time would pass until we found out that most of the athletes running in the 100-meter were using performance-enhancing drugs, an unfortunate theme of Olympic controversies. However, our next controversial moment actually made the Olympics look good. Have you ever heard of a humanitarian visa? Well, sprinter Kristina Simanskaya of Belarus was in dire need of help following her inexplicable expulsion from the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. It was reported by international media in August of 2021 that Kristina was being sent back to Belarus against her will after her home country removed her from the Olympic squad. She was removed from the team for posting a video on her social media that criticized her country's coaches.
Almost 15 years old, which is considered late age for professional sport. And just few people can show a really good result if you start to train at this late age.
Could you imagine for a second how many American athletes could be reprimanded for the same thing? There wouldn't be enough visas worldwide to serve as a refuge for our athletes. Fearing for her life if returned to Belarus, Kristina called the Japanese police and asked for protection. Luckily, Japanese police granted protection to her, and officials from around the globe offered her a humanitarian visa. She eventually chose to accept a visa from Poland. Why Poland? Polish officials explicitly guaranteed that she could continue training and competing in Poland. Needless to say, Belarus will regret this costly decision in 4 years, as Kristina has high hopes to be a medalist. This controversial moment in track and field history served as a reminder of something that often happens on the Olympic stage. 1, there are vast inequities between nations, and 2, the good things we have in the United States. There you have it, track and field fans. From questionable gender tests to steroid-infested races, those are the most controversial moments in track and field history.